Alright, we've got a lot of serial killers to talk about today, so let's dive right in. Here is part 2 of the top 10 real prisoners who are too evil for hell. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Scott Lee Kimball. This is a man who took the lives of at least 4 people between the years of 2003 and 2004, but I say the words at least because although it's never been able to be proven, it is thought that he actually took the lives of somewhere around 20 plus people. During the first of his 2 crime-filled years, Scott actually worked as an FBI informant, but to none of our surprise now, he was one of the worst informants of all time. Not only did he rarely provide any sort of evidence that actually ended up being useful, but much of the evidence he provided ended up later being proven false. He was caught in 2006 not only for these horrific crimes, but many others as well, which included things like fraud and forgery. He ended up being sentenced to 70 years in prison, and he is still currently serving that sentence. In our number 9 spot today, we have Charles Cullen. This guy used to be a nurse who took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through subsequent interviews, it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40, he just couldn't remember the names of them all. But of course, he could remember the details of his crimes against them. His crimes started in 1988 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October of 2003, when a patient at a hospital passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only 1 count of his crimes, but he just ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continuously asked the judge to step down and apparently repeatedly chanted, "Your Honor, you need to step down," for 25 minutes, even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts. It is thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly unbelievable. Charles was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences and will be eligible for parole in 2403, so let's hope he doesn't make it that long. In our number 8 spot today, we have Hebert Mullin. Okay, I'm a true crime fan, and the more I learn, the more that being a person living in California in the 1970s seems like a terrifying experience. Like seriously, there were so many horrible, some of the worst serial killers who were active in the state at this time. I don't know how anyone got any sleep or did anything. Hebert is just one of the many who were active at this time. It is said that Hebert, before his crime spree, was quite bright and well liked. He was voted most likely to succeed in high school, but by his mid-30s, his life had taken a dark turn, and he was now a serial killer who would go on to take the lives of at least 13 people. To be perfectly honest, Hebert definitely had some mental illness struggles that greatly contributed to his horrific crimes that he committed. That does not excuse what he has done, but it would be completely unfair to not mention that part of the story. Experts have explained that Hebert suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, and he believed that his crimes were preventing earthquakes in California. He only believed this sort of fantasy more after his arrest because coincidentally, there were no earthquakes in California during his crime spree, but there was one shortly after his arrest. In 1973, he was sentenced to life in prison, and although he has been up for parole a number of times, he has been denied every single time, with the next hearing taking place in 2025. In our number 7 spot today, we have Luis Garavito. Luis gained a nickname from the media of the Beast, and I think that's a great indication of the nature of his atrocious crimes. He is said to be one of the worst serial killers in the entire world, and it is believed that his victim count is up in the 300s range, which is absolutely shocking. He confessed to 147 crimes, and he was found guilty on 139 of those counts, which puts his sentence at 1,853 years, but here's the thing. This trial took place in Colombia, where he lives, and there is a law which puts the maximum sentence to 30 years. He was sentenced in 1999, meaning there's only a few years of this sentence left. He also had years taken off of his sentence because he assisted police in the search to recover some of the victims' bodies, which means that just next year in 2023 he is eligible for parole. According to Luis himself, 2012, he committed these crimes because he had made a deal with the devil, and he explained that satanic ritual was involved in all of his crimes. In our number 6 spot today, we have Randy Kraft. More commonly known as the Scorecard Killer, this monster is thought to have tormented and then taken the lives of 16 different young men from 1972 to 1983. Most of his crimes were committed in California, and he most often would pick up his victims as they were hitchhiking near military bases. The reason for his nickname is because of this strange and sinister list he had that had cryptic references to each of his victims. Based on this list, it is thought that he may have taken the lives of more than 50 people, which is beyond disturbing. When Randy was finally caught, he was pulled over by the police, who, when they went around to the passenger side, discovered the body of a 25-year-old Marine who would become Randy's final victim. Randy has been sitting on death row at San Quentin for over 25 years for these crimes, and despite his conviction and death sentence, and the gruesome discovery on the day he was caught, Randy still maintains his innocent plea. Something's telling me he just might be lying. In our number 5 spot today, we have Dennis Rader. The BTK, whose real name is Dennis Rader, was one of the worst serial killers from 1974 to 1991. He left taunting letters for police and newspapers where he described his crimes, but thankfully, this annoyingly large and misplaced ego is what led to his demise. After a 10-year hiatus on his disgusting crimes, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, so he began communicating with the media again in 2004. This communication, combined with his lack of knowledge on how technology works, led to his arrest in 2005. During his trial, he didn't apologize for his crimes, but he did describe them in full detail, which is horrifying and extremely eerie. I could not even imagine having to be there during that. After his trial, he ended up being sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. When Rader was first arrested, when the police were taking him to the station, an officer asked him, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" To which he replied, "Oh, I have some suspicions why." In our number 4 spot today, we have Gary Ridgway. This horrible human being is also sometimes known as the Green River Killer, and his crimes took place somewhere between 1982 to potentially as recent as 2001. He was convicted for 49 crimes but confessed to an unbelievable 71, which makes him the second most prolific serial killer in the United States in terms of confirmed killings. Most of his victims were either sex workers or women in vulnerable circumstances, and through DNA profiling evidence in 2001, authorities were able to connect him to 4 of his crimes. From there, they made a deal with him where they would spare him the death sentence in exchange for the disclosure of the location of all of the missing women. Gary took the deal and was spared the death sentence, and instead was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Not only did he say that he chose the type of victims he did because they were, quote, easy to pick up, and that he, quote, hated most of them, but he also called his crimes his career. So, do with that what you will. In our number 3 spot today, we have Rose West. Rose West is an English serial killer who committed her crimes alongside her husband. He definitely also would make a spot on this list, but he decided to take his own life in 1995 after being arrested while awaiting trial. Really strong stand-up man. The terrible pair were investigated and subsequently arrested for taking 9 lives together, with Rose receiving an additional charge for another 10th life. During the court proceedings, against the advice of her counsel, Rose decided that she would testify herself, and what a trip that was. During her testimony, she sometimes was very tearful and dramatic, but of course, an act like that can be hard to keep up, so other times she was just cracking jokes and laughing. Imagine doing your tight 5 while you're on trial for the worst of the worst crimes. Luckily, it seems as though the jury hated that as much as I do, because they came back with a unanimous verdict of guilty on all 10 crimes. Get this, in prison, Rose West met Myra Hindley, which if you don't know who that is, she committed a bunch of very similar crimes with her husband, boyfriend, partner, whatever as well, and the two became besties, and they even had an affair throughout the whole thing. Rose is still trying to say that she was totally innocent and that Fred was completely responsible for all of the crimes. Also, to make this story even crazier, for those of you who watched part 1 of this series, the number 1 spot on the last one, her name was Joanna Denny. Well, Joanna was in the same prison as Rose, and in 2019 she threatened to kill her. Because of this, they had to move Rose secretly to another location because there was a very real threat to her life. In our number 2 spot today we have Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is most often referred to as the Unabomber due to the atrocious crimes that he committed. He was known for being quite bright from a young age, and it is believed that he had an IQ of about 167. He was accepted into Harvard at the age of just 16, and he went on to receive a PhD. At 25, things were still looking bright for the guy as he landed himself a job as an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but just 2 years later he resigned from that position and his life took quite a drastic and dark turn. In 1971, it is said that Ted moved to a remote cabin in Montana that had no electricity or running water. From 1971 until 1977, Ted learned to live a hermit, off-the-grid lifestyle while learning different survival skills, but once 1978 rolled around, he was ready to start his terror campaign. From here until 1995, he began a nationwide bombing against people who were involved with modern technology. He planted these weapons or would mail them, and in the end took the lives of 3 people and severely injured 23. Just like many of these kinds of people, his own ego and delusions got in the way, because on April 24th, 1995, he sent an anonymous handwritten letter that was addressed to the police via the New York Times. His own brother ended up recognizing his handwriting, however, and that's the tip that he gave to the FBI. Ted was then captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In our number 1 spot today we have Christopher Scarver. Okay, Christopher is a little different than the others on this list, and if you're unfamiliar with his story, you'll soon find out why. Basically, on June 1st, 1990, Christopher showed up at the Wisconsin Conservation Corps Training Program office, and there he demanded money from the man he found. When the man only gave him $15, Christopher went on to shoot him. Christopher then went and demanded money from another man and continued to shoot the man he had already shot until this second man gave him money. Christopher was caught and convicted for this horrible crime, but the story does not end here. On November 28, 1994, Christopher was assigned work detail with 2 other inmates. One was Jesse Anderson, who had taken the life of his own wife, and the other was none other than prolific serial killer and monster himself, Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, when the 3 were left alone, Christopher took a bar from a piece of equipment in the exercise room and used that to basically beat and kill the other 2. I'm not gonna lie, there's no excuse and no reason for any of the crimes these people committed, including these ones, but there is a very weird sort of poetic justice to that. Christopher was tried again for these 2 crimes and received 2 more life sentences. Apparently in 2012 it was announced that he wants to write a tell-all book about the killing of Dahmer, which is definitely bizarre, but we'll see if that ever comes to fruition, I guess. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!